Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, the one who always was, who is, and who is still to come. Whenever the living beings give glory and honor and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down and worship the one sitting on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever. And they lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and they exist because you created what you pleased." Welcome back to church this morning. I hope that you were all blessed by what Pastor Brendan had to say in Sabbath school time. I invite you to stand and we'll start this next part of our service with a song.
It is now my honor and privilege to welcome all of you to our Southern Regional Day. This morning we learned about consumerism and the Sabbath. And Pastor told us that one of the antidotes for consumerism is connecting and sharing. Now, I just want you to turn to the person next to you. In fact, just look around you and check if there's somebody that you haven't said hello to. I knew you just needed an excuse to talk to the person behind you, around you. That is wonderful. And it's also wonderful to see how the smiles just broke out, as you're saying hello. Welcome to our Southern Day Regional. I know there are people, from various churches, here with us. Please, don't feel welcome, be at home. Don't feel welcome, be welcome. And also want to welcome our pastor, our preacher for the day, Pastor Pratt. We pray that God will use you again this day as you minister to us. May God bless you and happy Sabbath.
Just a couple of announcements for this morning. First one is Morphevalians, or those that visit here, in 2 weeks' time, beginning of September, isn't the year disappearing on us? Beginning of September, it's Father's Day. Special service here for Father's Day, but included in that is a baptism as well. So we encourage people to be here and part of that. Our second announcement this morning is for everyone that is here today. There is a combined lunch afterwards in the hall. If you've come, you didn't realise that it was there and you haven't brought food, don't worry, there's plenty there. Come and enjoy the fellowship together and just spend time together up there afterwards. So that's straight after our church service today. Thanks.
Well, good morning. My name's Pastor Travis Manners. I'm the pastor here. And Brendan, I'm wondering if I can call you up the front. Those who were here for Sabbath school got to hear and see Brendan and hear him talk. And did you appreciate that? Yes. Wasn't it great? And I know that you'll appreciate more what he has to say. Brendan, just wanted to spend some time and get to know you. So, which Pastor Pratt are you?
Which Pastor Pratt? My oldest brother's a pastor. He's in Victoria, North Point Church. My next brother's a pastor. He's a balloon twister. I think he came to your big camp and made balloons. My youngest brother's a pastor. He's the personal ministries guy up in Queensland. I've got one normal brother who claims he's the only normal one in the family because he's not a pastor. So I'm in the middle of that.
You're in the middle of that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So tell me about your family. You're married, kids. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, married to Amanda. Amanda Buse. She's an author, so she spends her day writing stuff. She writes mainly novels for teenage girls, but just doing some for teenage boys now. I have 3 children, Brad, 16, Benny, who's 14, and Jimmy, who's 11.
Excellent. Tell me a bit more about Amanda and her works, because we may have seen some of her books that she's done and what's recently happened there.
Yeah, Signs published Heaven Sent and Summer Fades, so you may have seen them. They address various teenage issues. There's Bible study guides that match that. Summer Fades has just been this week printed in German. So there's a German version that the Adventist Publishing House in Germany has done that one, so she's a bit excited about that.
Excellent.
But you'll see one called Hunter Chronicles coming soon. For if you're a Pathfinder, you're going to see that one coming real soon. There's a whole series of 5 books coming there.
Excellent. We'll complete the rest of this interview in German then. That will be fine. You and I were at Avondale College together, and you have a passion, and some of you may have seen we put up a little video with you with Cuddles. Tell us about Cuddles. Did Cuddles make it today? Who is Cuddles? And tell us things about that.
Well, Cuddles is one of my pet pythons. She's the one that lives upstairs. The rest live in the reptile room downstairs.
Okay.
But at college, I used to have a spare room. It was my reptile room at college. The dorm said, have another room. So I filled that with reptiles. Then I got sent to New Zealand. Mum said it was God's way of making me normal. And we lived as neighbours in New Zealand as well.
We did too, yes.
But yeah, now back in Melbourne again. So Cuddles is the diamond python. She's beautiful.
Let's pray for you right now. Tell me about your journey in ministry.
Yeah, so started out in New Zealand, so at Papatoe Church for 10 years. And then Greater Sydney Conference, where I was what they call discipleship coordinator, so working with our churches, our schools on how that all discipleship works. And currently my job is pastor to pastors for Australia. And so I work at the Union office in Melbourne, but we have 480 pastors across Australia, and I get to work with the conference ministerial guys, work together on how we go about looking after our pastors, resourcing our pastors, developing resources for pastors, helping pastors with development.
So on paper, you're my pastor.
Yes.
Excellent. I've got this problem. We'll come back to you. So tell me, you go around and you talk to a lot of pastors, you see a lot of Adventist churches. What's exciting you most about Cuddles? About the Seventh-day Adventist Church at present.
What excites me most about the Adventist Church? Well, apart from the fact that I really do sincerely believe that the message that God's entrusted to us is the message that's required for this time. I really do believe we have a message that calls people out of false worship of God, which you probably guess I see consumerism in that space, into what it is to be a biblical community. What excites me, though, is the number of... Well, Walter Brueggemann says, he goes, the future belongs to those who give the next generation reason to hope. And when I see churches with young people, whether it be up the front, whether I see rows of young people, that excites me. When I see kids in Sabbath schools, it excites me because that is, the future belongs to the people who give the next generation reason to hope. When I see churches doing that, like I see here, that excites me.
Great, fantastic. Tell me, let me ask you this. You're about to tell part of your story, part of your journey, and we're looking forward to hearing that. What does Jesus mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sure, there's the whole philosophical side, which is, the living sacrifice, give my life away to live out this Jesus story. We'll talk more about that in the worship service today. But reality is, when it comes down to a personal level, Jesus is, when I say Jesus is in me, the whole idea, I like to practically be that living sacrifice. So what's it look like when I can give myself away and allow Jesus to work in and through me? He is life.
Thank you. We've got a little something that we just want to give you thank you for coming all the way to us. And you may want to open it and have a little quick look while you're there.
Another reptile?
Yes, just... Tell us about the time you got bitten by a poisonous snake and went to bed and prayed, "Dear Jesus, please help me wake up in the morning."
Well, that's because the college didn't know I had death at us at that point. It was only later.
So just a few little
excellent.
Just a few little things from South Australia, and a little game for your boys and for your family that you can go and play. We really appreciate what you have done. Here, you can have that. You hold that. Really appreciate what you have done. I just want to have a quick prayer with you. And let's do that. Father in heaven, just want to thank you for Brendan, and thank you for the incredible ministry that he has, and for the passion that he has for you. And Lord, I just want to pray that as he speaks to us today, that it will be your voice that we hear. We come to your presence, and we just leave our service and our speaker and ourselves in your care. We pray in your name. Amen.
Thanks, Trent.
Before you go, this time last year, we've got a mutual friend. We had Russell and Christia Wilcox come, and today's a special day for them.
Russell's son Peyton is getting baptised this afternoon.
Excellent. So Russell and Christia's son Peyton is getting baptised, but we thought that we would show you the story of Christia. So here's a short story about Christia, who was here this time last year. Thanks.
5 years ago, I was happy in my role as a development engineer at local council, and a teaching friend of ours emphatically told me that he thought I should consider being a teacher, and that he thought teaching would be a better fit for me. And I said to him, absolutely not. We had just come back from a holiday, and it was a Monday, and I had a feeling that I should consider teaching. It was a call. It was so compelling and such a strong sense that I decided to do investigation into what that may look like. I was a mother, we have a young family. What would be the implications of a new career to me? I expected that a career change from civil engineering to teaching might mean that I needed to start from scratch. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that I could get my teaching qualification in 2 years. That has been a journey that has brought me to here, where I am now a full-time teacher in maths and science. Now I have a huge opportunity where I get to impact young people for Jesus. My own family circumstances prevented me from leaving the area here to study, but Avondale offers a 2-year master's program in education which can be done online or on campus.
So today our offering is actually for education. We have 3 wonderful schools here in South Australia. 3 Prescotts, and that is where the money today will go towards those. I could stand here for an hour or two and share a number of things from Prescott College Southern and the wonders that are happening there of students learning about Christ and getting to know God. There's just so much that happens week by week at Prescott Southern. So I just ask that you dig deep, but you will notice as well that there is a white hard hat going as round as well. So there's 2 offerings this morning. The first offering is for regional day expenses. So there are expenses that happen for us coming together as a group of churches together. So if you could also put a little bit into that one for us, and then our main offering for the conference today is education. So thank you, worship assistants. The hard hat, is definitely for the regional expenses.
Please bow your heads as we pray. Dear God, good morning. As our Korean student would say, Annyeong, Jal Janae. Hi, how are you? It is wonderful how no matter what part of the world we live in, you are there with us and can understand each one of us as we talk with you. This morning we pray for the world and all who live on it. We pray for the world leaders and the changes they make and those it affects. Please be with the world, help those that look for you, and show yourself through us to those who haven't found you yet. Thank you for cultural difference and how interesting you have made the world.
Dear God, we would also like to pray for our country, Australia. Thank you for the food and clean water we get, and please help our country stay at peace. Help the leaders of our country make wise decisions.
Thank you that we have all made it here today. Thank you that we can have a day like this, where all the southern churches can come together and be together and worship. Please be with us as we go about our daily lives. Help us to be a witness to you and to lots of people, so that our churches can grow and we can all live together with you in heaven someday.
Dear God, thank you for today. Thank you for the beautiful weather that you've bestowed on us, and for this opportunity to get together, to worship, to serve, to connect and to grow and to share with one another today. We thank you for this Sabbath and for this community. And please be with Brendan today as he shares more with us, and may we all gain a blessing from that. In your name, amen.
Children's story. Do we have children here in South Australia, in this part of Adelaide? Come on down, let's have a chat. Nice to see you guys. We do. We're very enthusiastic children. Tell me, what do you got for a pet? You got any pets? What pets do you keep in the saddle? You keep a dog. What sort of dog? Big dog, little dog? Big dog. What pets have we got? Any pets? Anyone got chooks? Yeah, anyone got fish?
I used to have chooks.
You used to have chooks?
I got one dog.
You got a dog?
A dog and a kitten.
A dog and a kitten. Do they get on?
My kitten went away and Winterbottom rolled by.
Your kitten ran away?
Yeah, and my dog.
Do you know what? If you get a snake, he'll never run away. He's got no legs. So let me tell you about how to get a goanna. Because when I was your age, I still do keep reptiles, but I had lots of different reptiles. I had my snakes and my lizards. I had bearded dragons and water dragons and stumpy tails and blue tongues, and I had some beautiful goannas. Like the ones when you go down to the Murray River and you see the big ones with the yellow and black striped tails. They're Richmond Tiger goannas. They're good goannas. And let me tell you how you catch one. Do you want to catch one? Do you know what? If I'd driven my car, I could have brought one with me to show you a real goanna how to catch it, but I'm just going to have to tell you today, I just have to describe it. So this is what you do. Because if you want to pet goanna, and it's now illegal to grab them out of the bush. When I grew up as a kid, no one really cared. And so I'll tell you how I got my pet goanna. Okay? Now they've got to have licenses and everything. But I'll tell you how I got my pet goanna. I would put on my cricket pads. I would put on my cricket gloves. Why? Because those goannas, they have big claws. Okay, so I didn't want them to claw. He's doing okay. I didn't want them to claw my legs. Now, goannas also have curled back teeth. So their teeth go like that, and when they bite, they take a hunk. So you don't want them to bite your hand, so you put on your cricket gloves, cricket pads, cricket gloves. And even though I was hot in Mildura, I put on a loose jumper. And that way, when they clawed, they would rip the jumper rather than my arm. And I would get my big fishing line that had a noose on the end, and off I would go walking along the riverbank looking for a goanna. Okay? When you finally spot a goanna, you'd see him, he'd run up the tree. Okay? So there he is up the tree. He's got his big claws holding on. You think, that would make a lovely goanna. I should take him home. One time I caught a goanna at school, by the way, and I put it in my school bag, and I forgot to tell my mum. I put my bag on the table, she opened the bag, and out jumped the goanna, and she jumped on the table and screamed, and my sister jumped on the table and screamed, and the goanna ran around the house and ripped the curtains, and that's that I got banned from having reptiles inside. But I would go along the riverbank, and there's the goanna. Now, you have to wait patiently, because you slide your noose over the goanna's head, and...
My dog not go out. My dog got a cage.
Your dog ate a cake. That's great. So you put the fishing line over the goanna's head, and he doesn't move. He just sits there. So you slide that over his head. But if you pull now, then you won't get him because you'll hold on. So you watch him, he watches you, you watch him, he watches you, and when he gets relaxed, when he thinks there's no problem here, and he lets go to take a step, that's when you pull. And down he comes. So now you've got to go out on the ground, and you've got him in a fishing line, in a noose. So that's when you jump on his back, and you have to grab him. Can you be my goanna? You grab him behind the head like that, because you don't want him to bite you. Then you grab him behind at the top of the tail because you don't want him to scratch you. And then he whips you with his tail. But that's the worst part. I mean, that's the best part. So you don't get bitten, you don't get scratched. And as you're holding the goanna, you say to your brother, quick, open the bag. And your brother opens the Hessian bag, you drop it in the bag. And then you say, quick, open another bag, because I've learned from experience they often scratch out of the first bag. You put him in the next bag. And then you take him home.
And good evening. I think there wasn't zip on there.
Yeah? Oh, no. So then we take the goanna home. And then I put him in my goanna cage. So my dad made me a lovely goanna cage. Now, how do you tame your goanna? Because he was pretty wild. I'll tell you how you tame him. That when you go to school, and you get a reader in your homework, that when you get home, you do your homework in the goanna cage. And you sit down this end, and the goanna's up that end, and he'll be as far away as he can from you, but he'll just look at you. And you will just do your homework in the goanna cage, and you'll just walk away. But when you walk away, you leave an egg. And later on, he'll come down, he'll go, ooh, that's a nice egg, and he'll eat the egg. The next day, you go and do your homework in the goanna cage again. And this time, he'll watch you, and you leave an egg again, and you do this for a few days. And eventually, he thinks when that person comes into this cage, they leave an egg, and he will be quicker at running down to get it. And he will start getting braver and braver and think, I wonder if I can get that egg before that person even walks away. And so you do. You let him come up, and he grabs it. You don't even look at him. He grabs it. A few days later, you look at him when he grabs the egg. A few days later, while he grabs the egg, you give him a little pat on the head. And he goes, but then you pat him on the head again. And you know what? After about 2 months, you put his lead on and take him for a walk. And you get a very tame goanna. I used to have some beautiful tame goannas. Do you think the Bible tells you about taming goannas?
No, I'm kidding.
Of course it does. Do you know, if you read the book of James, there's a book in the New Testament called James, and it says men can tame all kinds of animals, and it says even reptiles. Apparently crocodiles can't be tamed, never tried that. But most reptiles, they tame down beautifully. So it says they can even tame reptiles, but there's something harder than a reptile to tame, it says.
Piranhas.
What do you reckon's harder than a reptile to tame?
A crocodile.
Well, a lion would be pretty hard to tame, but people seem to manage it.
No, I think lions.
James says that harder than a reptile to tame is your tongue. You got a tongue?
Yeah.
Yeah? And it says it's hard to tame. How do you tame a tongue? Do you know what? Your tongue, can it say wild things?
Wild.
It says mean things. Yours is a wild tongue. It said wild. It says mean things. It can say hurtful things. It can call people names. It can get cross.
Wait a minute.
But what about a nice tongue? What about a nice tame tongue? It says, yes, Mummy, I'd love to come and help. Yes, Mummy, I'd love to do my bath time right now. Yes, Mummy, I love eating my cabbage. Yes, Mummy, I will help. What about a tongue that says, Dad, I'd love to help you in the garden? What about thank you very much? Tongues can say lovely things. And so the book of James says we need to tame our tongues, but then James says something else. He says the way you tame your tongue, he says your tongue, your mouth just speaks what your heart is full of. So the way you tame your tongue is what's in your heart. And if you've got wild things in your heart, it says wild words. But if you've got Jesus in your heart, you end up saying nice words, and you end up saying words that encourage people and look after people. So, next time you see goanna, probably don't worry about going and catching it. But I want you to think about taming goanna, but more importantly, I want you to think about taming your tongues and how your words can be Jesus' words to other people. I'm going to talk a bit more about that today. So head back to your seats and we'll chat at lunchtime. Have a good Sabbath.
This song that we're about to sing, I was looking up the origins of the song, and I found out that the lady who wrote it, she actually wrote it while she was in church, and her mind was drifting, and she was just thinking about salvation and the price that was paid for us, and she just had these words that were bubbling inside of her, and she couldn't wait to write them down, so she wrote them in the margins of her hymn book. And it had me kind of reflecting, like, how often am I, like, this message is so beautiful, but how often do I have it uncontrollably bubbling out of me? So please stand and sing, and as we sing, reflect on the price that Jesus paid for us.
Brendan Manning said, Jesus comes not for the super spiritual, but for the weak-kneed, who know they don't have it all together, and who are not too proud to accept the handout of Amazing Grace. So I ask that you continue singing with us. This is Amazing Grace.
Romans 8:35-37 says, "Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? As the scriptures say, for your sake we are killed every day, we are being slaughtered by sheep, like sheep. No, despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us." So many things in this world cause us to ask that question that Paul asked. but we can know that through Christ, we are more than conquerors and we have victory through him. So continue to sing and know that it is well.
When peace like a river attended my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. Here's my heart, make it whole. For you I live, in you I dwell. Oh my soul, it is And Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trumpet will sound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Here's my heart, make it whole. For you I live, in you I dwell. Oh my soul, it is well with my soul. Here's my heart, make it whole. For you I live, in you I dwell. Oh my soul, it is well.
Well, Trav, I'm so glad you invited me to spend Sabbath with you guys, because that music was just beautiful, by the way. That It Is Well part you added to that. Loved it and loved being here. What a wonderful place to spend Sabbath. So we're talking about priesthood of all believers. So the idea being that all of us belong. To make church work right takes all of us. So when Travis said to me, hey, so we're going to go on the priest of all believers angle, but he said include your story, and he said include the story of when you got sick. Now the thing is, Travis knows that story because Travis is my friend from a long time. Most people don't, because I don't talk about it. In fact, I've never talked about it before up the front. And Travis said, tell them anyway. So the reason why I don't tell my story is I know that everyone has things we work through, everyone has challenges, and sometimes I feel a bit like, well, mine's worked out fine. But 8 years ago, December, 8 years ago, I had a flu. That's not unusual. But this one was feeling worse and worse, and I'm like, this is no normal flu, this one's a problem. And I'm usually a person who avoids doctors, but Amanda said, Brendan, you have to get to the doctor. So in I went into the emergency place. I thought, this is not working well. And they said, you've got a flu, go home, you'll be fine in 3 days. Barely walked out of there, but the next day I felt my legs tingling and then felt nothing, and more of my legs tingling and then nothing, and my hands tingling and then nothing. And I'm thinking 3 days I'm going to be fine. On the third day I rang up and I said, that flu that I had for 3 days and I was going to be fine, I now can't even walk. And they're like, come back in. And so my brother-in-law dragged me out to the car because I couldn't move. And in I go. And that's when they're doing all sorts of scans and put me in little machines. And I'm about to go into that scan thing where they put you in that little pipe and they say to me, it's easier if you don't move. That's right, you can't move. And so they're doing the little scans on me, and then I'm in the bed at night time, and there's this nurse sitting there. I'm like, you're going to stay there all night? And she said, yes. And I'm like, why? She goes, making sure you don't die. I'm like, well, that's very kind of you. Because at that point, they couldn't work out why everything was just stopping. And so this is going up my body. It turns out it was a thing called transverse myelitis. And I had it at the top of my spine. It's when your own body attacks itself. My own immune system, rather than attack the flu virus, decided to attack the top of my spine. Now, other people who have transverse myelitis, there's 4 people in Australia get it a year on average. Other people have transverse myelitis. At that point, they're not walking. And the day the doctor came in and explained what it was, he says, you're not going to walk again, Brendan. And I remember our ministerial guy, Garth Bainbridge, I was working in Greater Sydney at the time. I remember him coming to visit me, and he was talking to my doctor out in the hallway, and whether they thought I couldn't hear as well. And Garth said, how long is he going to be off work? And the doctor said, if he does come back to work, it's going to be in a wheelchair. I thought, that's a bit intense. Anyway, so each day they'd come in, they'd stick pins into my body, they'd put ice on. Can you feel anything? No, can't feel anything. Stick more pins in. No, can't feel anything. Sticking pins in. And one day I felt this in my toe. I felt that. And they're like, really? And so the neurologist, she goes, if you can feel that, that means there's a message getting all the way through. And she tied this elastic band to my toe and tied it back in my bed and said, move your toe as much as possible. Make that work as much as possible. And I thought, if I have to move my toe, I don't have time to sleep. So at night time I was like, move my toe, move my toe, move my toe. And little bit by little bit, I could start being able to move more bits of my body. And I thought, I'm going to walk to that wall. The wall was from here to the chair away. And so at night time, I think I'm going to make it to the wall. I got anointed in this process, by the way. So elders came and anointed, so I'm going to make it to the wall. And I would try to make it to the wall, and my little drip thing would fall out. And I'm like, oh man, put that thing back in. And the nurse would come, and I'd jump back into. It's all okay in here, nothing going on. She would go away. And I would try and make it to the wall. And one night I made it to the wall. I took 2 steps and got to the wall. I thought, now I've got to get all the way back again. And I did get back again. And I said the next day, said to my neurologist, I walked to the wall last night. She goes, you didn't. I said, I did. And watch this. And she says, well, let's get a physio person. So a physio person comes in, and this is over a period of time. And they started teaching me how to walk again. So I had my little walking frame. And they're teaching me, so I lift you. I remember, I was at the Sand Hospital. I remember watching everyone turn up for church one day at Wahroonga, thinking, how are they walking? And I'm watching them thinking, what are they doing? And now to this day, I still don't feel my legs, by the way. Still don't feel that arm. This arm works fine. So stub your toe, nothing happens. There's upsides to it. and I had to learn how to walk again without feeling my legs. And she's saying, lift your heel, lift your toe, don't lock your knee, now your heel goes down. And so we just practiced and practiced. And so what's this got to do with anything about priesthood of believers and spiritual gifts? Reality is, when Paul in Corinthians 12 describes the church, he describes it as a body. He describes it as a body that's working right. He says when it's working right, when your teachers are teaching, when those who have the gift of generosity are giving, when those who have all these different gifts is encouraging hospitality, when everyone is living out their gifts, he said this body works. What happens when a body turns on itself? When we have problems. Do we ever see that in churches? Nah. Well, as we mentioned, my job is pastor to pastors. One of my other jobs is when church fights get out of control, I also go into those situations. And sometimes churches turn on themselves. That's a dysfunctional body. when Paul describes the body, he says, we're working right together. And he says, does the eye think it's more important? I can do it all by myself? No. What if one part of the body holds itself in higher esteem than another part of the body? What if one part thinks it's more important than another part? He says, that's crazy thinking. The body doesn't work like this. He says, you're the body of Christ, and together we make up this organism. And that's an incredible thing to be part of. We're the body of Christ. No part more important than the next part. This whole priesthood of all believers part is that all of us have access directly to God. All of us are ministers of Christ, and all of us have at least one spiritual gift to contribute to make this church more what God designs it to be. Sometimes churches have no feeling. See, for me to get transverse mellitus, as you see, I literally run most mornings. I did wake up early and thought, this is cold in Adelaide this morning, just because I can. For me to have no feeling, it's annoying, but it's not the biggest problem in the world. When a church has no feeling, that is a problem. When a church gets transverse mellitus, there's a big problem. When a church goes numb and doesn't feel, then it loses its ability to connect with the community. It loses its ability to be the heart of God. And in 1 Corinthians and in Ephesians 5 and 6, every time Paul talks about spiritual gifts, every time he talks about the body, he says, why do we do this? So we can build up the body, so we can bring God glory. So God's body can be seen in the community. If you and I start losing our feeling for lost people, if we start losing our heart for people full stop, if we start seeing people as commodities, or if we start getting so busy chasing our own ends that we don't have time to live in community, then we end up with a sick church with transverse mellitus. Paul describes something far more dynamic. He describes his community. He describes his community where, well, if you read in Acts, that's not Paul, but where Luke's talking about those who have gave to those who had not. The believers had together in one accord. They got together. They broke bread together. He describes it as the new community. And I'm getting so excited I keep missing my slides. He describes it as the new community. That this is a new way of doing life. When Paul says in this new community there's no Greek, no Jew, no free, no slave. He said this is a different way to look at it. It turns community on its head. If you had to answer in one word what God's dream is for his children, I think he would say it's community. Creation, he exists in Trinity. He creates us for community. Sin destroys community. But we read about heaven being this time of incredible community. And we, the church, as the priesthood of all believers, live in that community now. So there's these incredible scenes of what that community looks like. And we look at the New Testament church. There's lots of ways of being the church in the New Testament, by the way. Don't let anyone tell you that church has to be done this way in the New Testament, because the Greek churches were very different to the Jewish churches. And as you read about the different roles in churches, they did it differently. But they all had something in common. And as you read what Paul's instructions are to the church, or if you read the admonitions to the church that are at the start of Revelation, all of them are encouraged or exhorted. It's all about growing, serving, connecting, sharing, worshipping. And if your being community does that, then you're being this New Testament church. But where do things start heading the other way? Why did we need a reformation? Do you know what? For the first 300 years of the church's life, you would never read the sentence. You can't find the sentence, I'm going to church. It doesn't exist. For the first 300 years of the church, no one said, I'm going to church. Why? Because the Greek word ekklesia, which we translate church, is the Greek word for community, assembly. It is community. And that's why the church I pastored in New Zealand, we called ourselves Papatoa Seventh-day Adventist Community Church. In fact, we're saying community, church. Same word. And it is community. You don't go to community, do you? You are community. It's the system of relationships that make up the church. The New Testament believers believe very much that we are the church, and where we are, that's where the church is. So if we had that kind of thinking, church is not this building here at Morford Vale. The church, it's wonderful to have buildings, and buildings don't change lives. What happens in them does. It's wonderful to have a church building, But it's just a facility where we get together to celebrate being the body, but the church is wherever we are. And if you're at university, if you're at school, if you're at work in a factory, if you're at work in an accountancy firm, whatever, that's where the church is. That's what the New Testament believers believed. Where did that change? Well, 300 years in, this is an oversimplification of history, but we meet Constantine. Constantine makes Christianity the religion of the empire for all sorts of unusual reasons. It seems like there were some issues going on with the priests of the other gods, and he goes, I'll fix this. I'll make Christianity the religion of the empire, and we'll make that the whole thing. Mind you, if I get to heaven and meet Constantine and find out it was a heart conversion, not just simply political, I go, sorry, Constantine, I blamed you for being political, but hey, it seems like it was more a political thing than a heart thing. So Constantine says, I'm going to make Christianity the religion of the empire. Now, mind you, the church had allowed itself to move to the point that Constantine was even able to do that. What if Malcolm Turnbull got up tomorrow and said everyone in Australia has to be Seventh-day Adventist? Good thing, bad thing? It's forcing, not a choice. What would happen? As you understand, it wouldn't be a heart thing. It would be just a thing we had to do. Now, it sounds weird for us even to say it. There was a time in history when that literally happened. Everyone has to do it this way. Now, what if he then took all the buildings that belonged to the other churches and gave them to us? That'd be a good thing, eh? Then it's okay. No, well, that literally happened. It was like everyone, sorry guys, all these buildings now belong to this Christian group, and this Christian group is now the religion of the state. Everyone has to be Christian. What did it mean to be Christian? Well, it meant that for 1 hour a week on a Sunday, because that's when they were already worshipping other gods, we'll turn up, we'd get a service done to us. We didn't have to be part of things. Most times that service done to us was in a language I didn't even understand. I'd turn up, I'd get a service done, I'd pay up. If you didn't pay up, you got fined anyway. Great system for church building funds, by the way. If you didn't pay up, you get fined. So you turn up, that's why we've got such amazing buildings in the church's history. You turn up, you pay up, you get a service done, then you go home. Go home to what, by the way? You went home to the religion you always had before this crazy Constantine made you turn up here on a Sunday. You went home to what sociologists would call your folk religion. You went home to the same system belief you always had, and you went home that if you wanted your crops to flourish, you'd pray to the same God you always prayed to. If you wanted your wife to bear lots of sons, you'd pray to the same God you always prayed to. Until next Sunday, when you turned up, you got a service done to you, you paid up, then you went home. Back to ordinary life. And this became what it meant to be a Christian. From being this whole of life, ever I am, is this new community. From being this space where we'd get together and wash one another's feet and we'll all have things together in one accord, from being this new community, it now become turn up, pay up, get a service done, go home. Evangelism, that was something that happened on the edge of the empire because they had to be Christian anyway, so you didn't have anyone to evangelize. You might as well baptize babies because there's no choice anyway, they had to be Christian. And so fundamentally, Constantine changed what it was to be church. Just out of curiosity, do you think sometimes that we can get in the same trap where we turn up, we get a service done to us, we pay up, and then we go home? And we go home to our folk religion. If you're in Sabbath school, you can take a wild guess at what I think our folk religion is in our culture. Consumerism is where we look for our goals and our dreams and our hope and our meaning, and it's where we invest what we think is going to give us our best version of us. So we go home to consumerism until the next week when we turn up, we pay up, we get a service done and go home. This is when we start watching church. This is when we start watching professionals perform the service. This is when it was no longer about this New Testament community that was together in one accord. This is when I'm here to watch. We translate it in our culture, and sadly, we get a lot of Christians who watch church. And we get this little bit of Constantine idea, mix it with a bit of consumerism idea, and pretty soon church can become a commodity where I turn up, I watch what happens, and if it didn't meet my standards, then I might give that church another go, otherwise I'm going to go to another church. And unfortunately, when I was pastoring in Sydney, one of the things we used to talk about was this whole church hopping, church shopping idea, We would have people who would be here for a little while, they'd be that church for a little while, they'd be that church for a little while, and be here a church, there a church, ever a church. And unfortunately, they watch church. Now, there's nothing wrong with finding a church that works for who you are in your community and works for your family, but once you're in that community, you stay there and you invest deeply into it and you become part of it and you use your gifts to serve in that. Does it hurt sometimes? Yes. Is everyone going to be nice? Probably not, because they're humans. And community can be messy and community can be difficult, but it's worth it, because the other option is to skim life and to miss out on using your gifts. The other option is to watch someone else be community, and that might be comfortable, but you never get to be what God designed you to be. You never deploy those gifts He gave you. You never reach into a world of desperate need. You never prayed those passionate prayers for those people you never got to know. You can go through life skimming it, watching it, and never being part of it. Priesthood of all believers is we're part of this. We invest our lives into this. We pour our energy into community. And if you don't have time to pour your life into this community, guess what? You're just too busy. And you need to rearrange your life priorities, because otherwise, and this is the biggest danger of consumerism, the biggest danger of consumerism, that one day you're going to sit in an old age home and you're going to reflect on a marriage that never reached the intimacy it could have because you were just too busy. You're going to reflect on kids that grew up too quickly because you were too busy. You're going to reflect on spiritual gifts you never deployed. You're going to reflect on passionate prayers you never prayed. You're going to reflect on a church community you didn't ever get to know. That's the biggest danger, is you're going to skim life and actually never experience what it is to be part of biblical community. The priesthood of all believers is about all of us. All of us contributing our part, all of us playing our part, all of us becoming this body that shows God's glory. William Beckett, he wrote a book called The Second Reformation. And he talks about Martin Luther, and I will show you my picture. I think it's there. There it is. Travis said he showed you a picture a few weeks ago. There's Morford Vale of him knocking on the Wittenberg door. That's me knocking on the Wittenberg door, but Travis and I realised we've got different doors. So one of us has knocked on a different door. Reality is, if you're a historian, you'll know that that whole story is questionable in itself if you actually nailed on any doors. And there's 3 doors that claim they're the door. But anyway, that's me having a little knock on the door. One thing we do know for sure is that next table at the castle, Wittenberg Castle, is where he did do the New Testament translation. So that bit we can all agree on. So in this Reformation, Martin Luther's saying, hey, this church has turned into a different story. It's not meant to be this domination story. The church is now the state and it's dominating. He said, no, it's meant to be a different picture. William Beckham says there needs to be a second Reformation. He says, theologically, we've come a long way. Rex Edwards says the same in his book, Priesthood of All Believers. He says, but practically, we still often think in those Constantine terms. And he said, we still often see church as something I go to rather than something that I am. We see church as something I can consume rather than something that I am part of. And that Reformation, this is one of the things that excites me, to get back to your interview question, Trav. What excites me about the Adventist church? Do you know what? When the church was the domination story, or whether the church was a different story, the church that we see in Australia today, it has to increasingly rely on Christ to be the centre of this body, because we don't have protection of the state. Culture isn't supporting the church. And I think what the church becomes at this point of history is exciting, because I think more and more we're increasingly finding what it looks like when we're bodies of believers, when it's more than just simply a worship service or something a consumable. We need to remember that the church is about giving God glory, and you and I exist to give God glory, and we do that in community. Sometimes we treat the church as a consumable. Just making sure I'm not going to waste too much time, but I'm going to tell you a story. In Leadership magazine, there was a story of a pastor who got unwell, and another pastor came in to look after that congregation. And as he's shaking hands at the end, and I don't want to get into a music debate, but as he's shaking hands at the end, this lady says, I didn't like that music we sung today. His answer was, lucky we weren't singing it to you. Because reality is sometimes we think it is about me, and sometimes we make church about me, and sometimes we measure church by how I felt, rather than this is us. And this is all of us. and together we make community, and it might not always go my way. But that's how community works. Consumerism works against community because it says you can have all you want and you can have this little target market, but community is all about here we are together. And there's this bigger thing going on. What sort of story is the church living out here? The church has lived out all sorts of stories throughout history. There has been a domination story where the church and the state dominated. There's been isolation stories. Reality is you're going to live out a story. What's your story? Sociologists say that we have what they call a framing narrative. And in our framing narrative, we have this underlying story that we give our lives to. I say basically there's 5 framing narratives. Mark Griffith, who wrote One Generation from Extinction, Liz, I'm looking at you because I know you've listened to this guy talk because we're at the same talk. But he also writes about framing narratives, and he also talks about what stories we find ourselves living in. And he says, you're going to have a framing narrative. He says it's the same framing narratives that have been going for empires and people throughout all generations. He says you can choose any empire and look at what the story is of that empire, and it's going to be one of 5. He said, first of all, there's the domination story. In the domination story, it's, we'd be fine if you did it all my way. And I will dominate, I'll be in charge, you do what I say, it's going to be okay. Empires live out this story. Nations live out this story. Churches live out this story. As you look at the church in history, there's been points where the church is the domination story. You have to do it this way, otherwise we're coming after you. So in the domination story, it's do it my way. Mark Griffith says we live it out in marriages, we live it out in families. He says the response to the domination story is the revenge story. The revenge story is, I'm sick of you dominating and my whole life is consumed by revenge. And I'm going to pour my energy into revenge. That's my framing narrative. And the revenge story is all about, let's get rid of that domination story. You see this lived out in nations. You see it lived out in the Middle East at the moment. You see this lived out in Africa, where cultures are, it's revenge. That's what consumes them. You see that lived out in homes. You see that lived out in marriages. What happens when the revenge story gets rid of the domination story if they win? All of a sudden the revenge people are in charge. And that often leads to a more tragic story, which is the purification story. In that story, we're now in charge. We promised you there's going to be peace and safety. These stories are always about peace and safety. We promised you there's going to be peace and safety if we were in charge, but now there's not. The reason is those people over there. They're the reason. It's those ones over here. That's the reason we still don't have this peace and safety. You might think of Nazi Germany. It's those ones. It's that group of people. It's those Jews. It's those intellectuals. It's that group. It's this group. If we could get rid of them, that becomes a very dangerous story. Do we ever play that story in churches? It's those conservatives. They're the problem. No, it's those Liberal One Project people. They're the problem. If we could just get rid of them, then we'll be okay. No, that's a purification story. It doesn't work that way. It's all of us. The next story is the isolation story. This is a story that says, let's get away and do it ourselves. Let's shut ourselves off from everyone else. Let's only read what we write. Let's only sing what we put together. Let's do it all our way, and we're going to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. Do nations live out this story? North Korea? So we live out these different stories. There's the accumulation story. That's the one where it's all ours. And if we just have enough things, that's the commodification consumer story. And all these stories mix up. Okay. If this is the stories, domination, revenge, purification, isolation, accumulation, if these are the stories that empires have been living out, if these are the stories that get lived out in families, they get lived out in churches too, unfortunately. And when I go into churches where there's lots of disagreement, it's either a domination story or a revenge story or a purification story. They might dress it up as a Jesus story and they might dress it up as a theological point, but often it's just one of those stories. But if those stories all existed, were they around when Jesus was on this planet? Let's try the domination story. When Jesus was on this planet, who was the domination story? The Romans, the rotten Romans. There was the domination story. Now, if we read in the Gospels, the parts written in red, does Jesus have anything to say to people who are dominating? Well, strangely, he says, the first shall be last. You don't dominate very well when you put others first. Strangely, he says, you find your life when you lose it. You give it away. You don't dominate very well when you give your life away. Putting other people ahead of yourself. If we're following a Jesus story, then the domination story doesn't work. And whether that's the story that gets lived out in a church board or lived out in a marriage or lived out in a workplace, people who follow the Jesus story don't play a domination story. What about the revenge story? Does Jesus say anything to people living out a revenge story? Who was trying to do revenge in Jesus' time? Yeah, the Zealots. They were the revenge group. They were like, down with the Romans. Let's overthrow the Romans. Jesus says, if your enemy asks you to carry the load 1 mile, what are you going to do? Carry it 2. If he takes your shirt, what are you going to give him? You're going to give him your coat as well. You don't get revenge very well like that. Jesus says, it's not even your job to get revenge. Romans 12, vengeance is mine. And as much as possible, live at peace with everybody. In the Jesus story, revenge doesn't work. And in churches, it doesn't work either. What about the purification story? It's that group, it's that group. They're the problem. Jesus is saying, they're all my kids. That woman sitting by a well in Samaria, she's my kid. That Samaritan guy that I tell the story about, they're all my kids, the whole lot of them. Some of us are called to serve all of us, but it's not us and them. These are all my kids. And I call a group of you to look after all my kids. When we start playing purification stories as churches and saying it's that group, it's that group, it's that group, sometimes we can forget that they're all Jesus' kids, and some of us are called to serve all of us. What about the isolation story? Who was living out that story in Jesus' time? Back here, the Essenes. They had gone and made their own little community. We can thank them for the Dead Sea Scrolls, but their own little community. We're going to separate ourselves from the world. What does Jesus say to that sort of group? He says, you're to be light. He goes, can the salt make a difference if it stays in the shaker? Can the light make a difference if it's hidden? You're to be in the world, not of the world, but hey, these are my kids and you're going to be amongst them. Don't separate yourself away from them. Accumulation story. Anyone playing that one? Jesus chats to a rich young ruler and he says, I've got all this stuff which they saw as a symbol of God's blessing. And I've kept all the laws. What else do I do? And Jesus says, give it all away. What's he actually saying? Give it away and follow me. What he's saying is, do you define yourself by your things? If you didn't have all that stuff, would I still be enough for you? If you had nothing, would I be enough? And Jesus asked the same question of us today. Am I enough for you? If you didn't have all these things as a backup, would I still be enough? Reality is there's a different story, and it's the Jesus story. And I see this Jesus story lived out. One of the exciting things about my job, when Trav says, what are you excited about the church in Australia? I see the Jesus story lived out when I see communities working together, when I see people caring for those who have not, when I see people pouring their energy into groups of people, other people marginalised. And there's churches around Australia doing an amazing job of being the Jesus story. And I see it when churches together put their gifts together and be Christ's body. That's the Jesus story. It's a different story. It makes no sense in this system. And I think one of the sad things is for a long time, the church has played those stories. When I say the church in history has played domination, revenge, purification, isolation, accumulation stories. That's been the journey of the church. We've so closely identified with the empire that sometimes the church has become the empire. It has become the dominator. It has become that. And that's what the Reformation was all about, is saying, hey, there's a different story here. There's a Jesus story. There's a Jesus story, and we get to live in a different way. We give our lives away, and this Jesus story gets expressed in very different ways, in very humble ways. This Jesus story gets expressed in school classrooms. This Jesus story gets expressed in office buildings. This Jesus story gets expressed in marriages. And it's a different way of doing it. Sometimes you see those other stories dressed up as Jesus stories, and that's a sham. Is this domination story dressed up as a Jesus story, a purification story dressed up as a Jesus story? No. You can see the Jesus story, because those people are walking to the beat of a different drum. And when culture is usually about framing these other stories, we get called to be a different community. Revelation can call it a remnant if they want to. It's the group that follows the Lamb wherever he goes. It's that Jesus story. And guess what? As the world gets closer to its end, Revelation describes this Jesus group living out this Jesus story and showing the world what happens when a group of people live life God's way. When they serve more than they are served. When it's about inclusion, where it's about love, where people are seen as the treasure. That's living out the Jesus story. And you and I get an opportunity to live that out. You live that out together as a church family, as the priesthood of all believers, and that shows the world a different story. Every time Pastor Dietrich Stahl mentioned the passage out of 1 Peter, when in his welcome he talked about, you're a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Why? Because you're calling people out of darkness into light for God's glory. That's what we are. And sure, we all have different gifts and we have different backgrounds and we have different ways of looking at the world. But together there's a new community, a new story, and together we find ourselves in the Jesus story. It's not a philosophy, it's a relationship. Because Jesus says, I will dwell richly in you. He says, I'll work in and through you and you will bear fruit. And together we make up that story that shows Christ's body. Together you make up that story that shows Christ's body in this part of Adelaide. That's an amazing thing to be part of. That's worth your best energies. That's worth investing your gifts into. That's not worth skimming over. That's not worth taking flippantly, because that stuff matters for eternity. Giving your life away to be part of the Jesus story, acting your role in the priesthood of all believers, that stuff really does matter. So today I ask you to give yourself a heart check. Sometimes we talk about priesthood believers and we make it all out there, but I want a heart check for you today. What story are you living out? What story would your husband or wife say you're living out? What story would your work colleagues say you're living out? Give yourself a heart check. And is that the Jesus story?
Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Speak what is true, 'cause I am found, I am yours, I am loved, I'm made pure, I have life, I can breathe, I am healed, I am free. Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Speak what is true, 'cause I am found, I am yours, I am loved, I'm made pure, I have life, I can breathe, I am healed, I am free. You are strong, you are sure. Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Speak what is true.
Let's stand. Dear Lord, as we reflect on the words of giving you our heart, may it not just be a sentence, may it not just be a song, may it be something that comes to life in our everyday experience. May we allow you to work richly in us and work in and through us. And just pray for the churches that make up this part of the South Australian Conference. Pray that the churches in this region are able to show this part of South Australia what it is when a group of people live life your way, when we act out the Jesus story. And we just pray that all the various things that compete for our attention, amongst all that, we don't lose what matters most. Thank you, are a God who loves us beyond our comprehension. May we grow and serve and connect and share in all sorts of creative ways. May we give you our heart. May we allow you to work in and through us. Amen.
Thank you.